All right, today we're going to do 9.4 lesson 3 or day 3, which is the last part of solving equations by completing the square. I'm going to start this lesson though by going over some of the common errors I saw on your homework yesterday. So for something like number 17, I saw two common errors. You guys were good about adding 49 here, but then some of you forgot to add it to the other side. So again, because it's an equation, we need to keep it balanced, so make sure you're adding that value to both the left and the right-hand side. And then another error I'm seeing is here when we take the square root of 64, make sure you get plus and minus 8, okay, positive and negative 8. And then you're going to take away 7 from both sides. Some of you are combining that 7 and 8 to get a 1, but that's not really what that means. So this means negative 7 plus or minus 8. So this really means we have two versions. We have negative 7 plus 8. We have the positive version, and then negative 7 minus 8. So we have the negative version. So this one gives us 1, and that one gives us negative 15. So some of you are forgetting to do that plus or minus 8, and then some of you are kind of combining those to get a 1, but that's not really what it means. It means you have 1 with a plus and 1 with a minus to get two different answers. So I think those are the two main errors that I'm seeing. And then in number 21, this was the one with the fractions. So when we take our b value of 5, we would have 5 halves. When we square it, we get 25 fourths. So we would be adding 25 fourths to both sides. And then what I did was I took 8 and I rewrote that as 32 fourths, since 32 divided by 4 is 8. So when we add those together, those two fractions, we get 57 fourths. And then when we take the square root of both sides, we don't know the square root of 57, so that just stays. But we do know that the square root of 4 is 2, so we can just write that as a 2. So then we would end up with this answer, 5 halves plus or minus 57 halves. And you can write that also as 5 plus or minus root 57 all over 2. Okay, so that's how we can kind of look at 21. So I think those were the common errors that I saw in yesterday's homework. Okay, for today what we're going to look at is completing the square when the leading coefficient is not 1. So this process of completing the square and taking that b value and cutting it in half and then squaring it only really works when that coefficient is a 1. So if it's not a 1, we need to make it a 1. Okay, so in number 4, we earn a. We have 4x squared minus 4x minus 2 equals 0. So we can start the same way. We can add 2 to both sides. So that gives us 4x squared minus 4x equals 2. Okay, now we need to have a coefficient of 1. So what we're going to do is divide both sides by 4. Okay, and again, we're dividing by the leading coefficient, so that 4 technically. Okay, so this gives us x squared minus x on the left-hand side, and then 2 fourths or 1/2 on the right-hand side. Okay, once you did that division, then we can complete the square. So you had to divide first, and then you can complete the square. So our b value is negative 1. We would cut it in half, and we would square it. So that would give us positive 1/4. So we're going to add 1/4 on the left-hand side, add 1/4 on the right-hand side. This will then factor into x minus 1/2, quantity squared. On the right-hand side, a half plus a fourth is 3 fourths. Okay, we can take the square root of both sides, so that'll give us x minus 1/2. Here we would have plus or minus root 3, but we do know the square root of 4 is 2, so we can rewrite that denominator as a 2. All right, adding 1/2 to both sides, we would get our final answer of x equals 1/2 plus or minus root 3 over 2. Okay, so really the only difference is this step right here where we are dividing everything by that leading coefficient before you do the process of completing the square. So again, you have to divide first and then start completing the square. All right, let's look at C. So in C, again, we can start the same way. We're going to add 8 to both sides. So we would have 2x squared plus 20x equals 8. We need a leading coefficient of 1, so we're going to divide both sides by 2. This gives us x squared plus 10x. Okay, so make sure you do 2 divided by 2 gives us technically a 1 there, and then also 20 divided by 2 gives us that 10. Okay, and then we would have equals 8 divided by 2 on the right-hand side is 4. Okay, we need to complete the square, so we're going to take our b value of 10, cut it in half, and square it, which will give us 25. So that would be x squared plus 10x plus 25 equals 4. Make sure we also add that 25 on the right-hand side. Make sure we add it to both sides. Okay, our left-hand side would factor into x plus 5, quantity squared, and then the right-hand side is 29. Okay, now we're at the step where we can take the square root of both sides. So we would have x plus 5 equals plus or minus root 29. We can take away 5 from both sides. So our final answer would be negative 5 plus or minus root 29. Okay, all right, I'm going to do one more. I'm going to do B. D follows the same pattern. B is one with fractions, so we'll practice that one. Clean some of this up. All right, in B we have the same type of setup, so we have to make sure that we're getting the 12 onto the other side. Okay, so we have 3x squared plus 9x equals 12. We cannot have that 3 there, so we need to divide both sides by 3. That'll give us x squared, so 3 divided by 3 is 1. 9 divided by 3 gives us 3. And then 12 divided by 3 is 4. All right, when we take that 3, cut it in half and square it, that's going to give us 9/4. So we need to take, we'd have x squared plus 3x. We're going to add 9/4 onto the left-hand side, and we're going to add 9/4 onto the right-hand side. And then I'm going to take that 4 and I'm going to rewrite it as 16/4 so that I have those common denominators. Okay. The left-hand side would factor into x plus 3/2, quantity squared. The right-hand side gives us 25/4. Right, then we can take the square root of both sides, so we'd have x plus 3/2. Now we know the square root of 25 and 4, so this would be plus or minus 5/2. I'm going to take away 3/2 from both sides, and then we would get the answer. I'm just going to continue down here. We would get the answer x equals negative 3/2 plus or minus 5/2. Okay, so again, these are two answers. So our first answer is negative 3/2 plus 5/2. Our second answer is negative 3/2 minus 5/2. Okay, so this will give us 2/2, which is 1. This one will give us negative 8/2, which is negative 4. So we would get two answers for this one, x equals 1 and negative 4. All right, this is the last type of equations that we'll look at for completing the square, and then tomorrow we will move on to the quadratic formula.